Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for being here this afternoon. I am humbled to be here with our Premier Jason Kenney, Fort McMurray-Lackland Beach MLA Lila Goodridge, Fort McMurray Wood Buffalo MLA Tanya Yao, and Peace River MLA Dan Williams. And I know that somewhere the mayor of the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo, Dan Scott, and the reeve of Mackenzie County, Josh Canelson, are watching, so I would like to acknowledge them as well. As you all know, our government has been focused on managing the COVID-19 pandemic and preparing for our economic relaunch strategy. However, we are still prepared to help Northern Albertans affected by the 1-in-100-year flooding disaster. This flooding caused significant loss and damage in Fort McMurray, Fort Vermilion, Buttertown, and other communities in the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo and Mackenzie County. Public infrastructure has been damaged. Homes have been destroyed. There is a long road to recovery that lies ahead. This situation is particularly challenging for flood-affected communities, as it is taking place against the backdrop of an unprecedented pandemic. Fortunately, these communities have great local leaders and emergency management professionals who have been doing a tremendous job managing their local state of emergency. Our government has been in close contact with these folks to assess the damage and their needs for recovering and rebuilding. As the minister responsible for emergency management, I have been in regular contact with Regional Municipality of Wood Buffalo, Mayor Don Scott, and Mackenzie County Reeve Josh Canelson. They have been clear with me about their needs at this time. Northern Alberta has faced a lot of hardship in recent years. Our government understands how much this region has done for our province and our country. The economy of Northern Alberta has supported Canadians' needs for a very long time. Today is about supporting their communities and their people. With that, I would like to turn the microphone over to our Premier Jason Kenney, for further details.
Thanks very much, Casey. And thanks as well to MLAs Goodridge, Williams, and Yao for joining us today for an important announcement about how Alberta is standing behind the people of Northern Alberta following the terrible spring floods. The ice jams that formed during a breakup on Alberta's great northern rivers last month were some of the largest ever recorded. Ice jams are, of course, a natural phenomenon, and they occur every year all across our province, especially up north. But on rare occasions, a heavy ice pack, combined with a late arriving spring, plus rapid melt in the southern reaches of the rivers, can cause huge downstream jams, especially at the confluence of rivers like the Clearwater and Athabasca and Fort McMurray, or at sharp bends, shallow channels, bridges, and other obstacles. Longtime residents of communities along those rivers, especially up north, can recount events like the 1977 ice pileup at the highway bridge in Fort McMurray that raised water levels over 5 meters and flooded the city back then. Fort McMurray experienced flooding again due to an ice jam in 1997. The water didn't rise quite as much, but dozens of homes and businesses were affected. The same year, big jams on the Peace River caused flooding that damaged half the businesses in the town of Peace River and forced the evacuation of 4,000 residents. But this spring, was something else. A 1-in-100-year event in Fort McMurray, triggered by an ice jam that at one point was 25 kilometers long and ended up driving 13,000 of our fellow Albertans out of their homes and businesses. The jam on the Peace that forced the evacuation of about 500 residents of Fort Vermilion and neighboring First Nations communities was 40 kilometers long and caused the worst flooding those communities have seen since 1934. Regional Municipality of Wood Buffalo Mayor Don Scott has pegged the damage in Fort McMurray at least $100 million. Over 3,000 people are still out of their uninhabitable homes, and a local boil water order for much of the city will be in effect for some time to come. Local officials and first responders, plus volunteers, with support from Alberta's Emergency Management Agency and Provincial Operations Centre, they all did an outstanding job of coming together and getting people to safety while limiting the damage as much as possible. And I want to commend Mayor Scott and his team in Wood Buffalo and Reeve Knelson and his team up in Mackenzie County for their strong leadership and for all of the communities in coming together so quickly to keep people safe. Of course, everyone was dealing with the situation made much more complicated and stressful because of the battle against the COVID-19 pandemic. Albertans feel for everyone affected by this disaster, but especially for the people of Fort McMurray who have been going through so many tough times. The flooding came, of course, after just 4 years after the devastating 2016 fires, and on top of the ongoing challenges facing the energy sector, which has been very tough for local workers and businesses. Also over in Peace Country, folks around Fort Vermilion were contesting with the Chuckagh wildfires last summer, and of course many people lost property there as well. But the people of Northern Alberta and all the affected communities are made of very tough stuff. Generation after generation has endured these kinds of natural disasters and economic downturns, but always emerged from them stronger than ever, and that will happen again. The key is we never have to go it alone in this province. Albertans always come through for each other, and so it is again this year. So I'm very pleased to announce, on behalf of the Government of Alberta, that we will be providing communities in the north. We'll be making them whole by providing $147 million to help families, businesses, and communities to recover and rebuild. This is on top of nearly $8 million in emergency flood payments that have been provided so far to 7,500 evacuees to help cover food and shelter costs after they were forced out of their homes. So that's $147 million from the Disaster Resistance Program for the communities in the north affected by these spring ice jams and floods. MLA Goodridge will provide more details on the disaster relief program, but I'd like to add some broader context about the many big challenges facing our province today. Before I say that, I'm looking forward as well. I was up there, of course, with the Fort McMurray MLAs and some of our ministers at the height of the floods just over 2 weeks ago, and I'm looking forward to getting up to Fort Vermilion with MLA Dan Williams this coming Monday to survey the damage and meet with local officials and residents. The northern floods, the terrible toll of the COVID pandemic, the global economic shutdown, the oil price crash, all of this together adds up to a cascade of catastrophes like Alberta has never seen before. Today's Alberta unemployment statistics simply confirm the scale of that damage. Nearly 250,000 jobs lost in our province, the vast majority of those full-time jobs raising unemployment to over 13%. Frankly, I don't think those numbers fully account for the job destruction that has occurred, but they give us some sense of the depth of the challenge that we face as Albertans together. The good news, such as it is that we have a much bigger, stronger, and more diversified economy than we've had in major crises in the past. While our current fiscal situation is undeniably bleak, we have a lot more capacity today to cushion the economic blows than we did the last time things got this bad in relative terms during the Great Depression. There will be, however, a great fiscal reckoning, and that will come in the months and years ahead as we deal with the massive debts that we're taking on to get through all of our current trials. But until those trials pass, we will provide the support that our people, communities, and industries require to get through this. As I've said from the start of the pandemic, the public health crisis and the economic crisis are both threats, and we are challenged to preserve both lives and livelihoods. We have fought the coronavirus very effectively so far, much better than most places around the world. With our world-leading testing regime, our sophisticated contact tracing, and our rapid response capabilities, together with the continuing vigilance and discipline of all of us, we're in a very strong position to relaunch our economy, get our lives back in order, and start building a strong economy. Indeed, we never did have to shut down nearly as much of our economy to deal with the pandemic as most other provinces did. And next week, if we continue to keep our hospitalization numbers low, and if the infection rate remains stable or continues to decline, we'll be able to launch stage 1 of our carefully targeted and prudently managed relaunch strategy. And on that, I'm very pleased to see that day by day, the number of people in Alberta who have recovered from COVID increases above the number of active cases, a very important marker. I'm also pleased to see that in contending with the 2 large outbreaks at Cargill and JBS in High River and Brooks, that we have seen over 85% of those who had been infected who have recovered. Before handing it over to MLA Goodridge, I want to report something I just learned that I find very disappointing about price gouging happening in our province. You know, a crisis like this brings out the best in most people. Sadly, it also brings out the worst in some folks too. I talked about this a few weeks back when we heard about scams targeting seniors, scaring them about COVID to get money from them. And I said there's got to be a special place in hell for somebody who would exploit vulnerable seniors during a public health crisis. Well, I have very harsh words for people who would exploit a crisis like this to gouge their neighbors and fellow Albertans with outrageous prices for personal protective equipment and sanitation supplies. The Consumer Investigations Unit of Service Alberta has charged a Calgary-based business with ignoring an order to stop charging exorbitant, inexplicable prices for several consumer products. CCA Logistics Limited Newsway was trying to sell 3M masks for $120, a 400% markup, hand sanitizer for nearly $40 a unit, a 200% markup, hand soap with a 300% markup, and on and on. They were given an order to stop price gouging. They ignored it, and now we have come down on them with serious fines. We have hundreds of ongoing investigations into price gouging, and I want to send a clear message. If you think you're going to gouge your fellow Albertans with ridiculous price increases, exploiting the pandemic, you've got another thing coming. We're going to go after you. We're going to go after you and throw the book at you and lay down the law and protect consumers against price gouging. And so this was the first charge that we've made. But I can tell you there are many, many other active investigations, and we will leave no stone unturned to bring the full force of the law to those who are seeking to exploit their fellow Albertans through price gouging. And with that, I will, I believe, introduce MLA Goodridge.
Thank you, Premier Kenney, and thank you everyone for being here today. Fort McMurray is one of the communities that was the hardest hit by the flooding, and it primarily resides within my riding of Fort McMurray-Lac-La-Biche. As a resident and the MLA representing the area, I know firsthand how challenging the past several years have been. Essentially right now, our community is facing 3 crises: the COVID-19 pandemic, low commodity prices, and now historic flooding. This all comes just a few years after the devastating fires in 2016. Today's announcement will go a long way towards helping Fort McMurray, the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo, and Mackenzie County rebuild. I am particularly proud that even in the midst of unprecedented global health emergency, our government is committing significant resource to helping Northern Alberta get back on its feet after this disaster. As the Minister and the Premier have said, our region has done so much for so many. But now we need a helping hand. Today's announcement is that helping hand. And we will help get us back to the strong, determined form that we've been known for years. Where I come from, Fort McMurray Strong is not just a bumper sticker or a slogan, but it's a way of life. But even the strongest among us sometimes need a helping hand. I want to once again thank the Premier, Minister Madu, Cabinet, and the entire government for believing in Fort McMurray and Northern Alberta. I know some long hours have been put in this week. I also want to thank our local leaders, Mayor Don Scott and Reeve Josh Knelson in particular, for their advocacy, which has helped me this announcement come together so quickly. And with that, I think we'd be happy to take some questions.
Thank you. For the benefit of those on the phone, we also have Shane Schreiber in the room, the Alberta Emergency Management Agency. Operator, can you please put through the first caller?
First is Chris Varco with the Calgary Herald. Go ahead, Chris.
Hi, this is a question for the Premier. Actually, it's two questions. Premier, I'm wondering if you could give your reaction to the unemployment jobless numbers that came out today, and I guess the extension of the federal wage subsidy program that the Prime Minister announced today. That's the first question. Separately, we still haven't seen a comprehensive federal package to help the hardest hit sectors of the economy like tourism, aviation, and the oil patch. I guess what's your response or your reaction to the length of time that it is taking for Ottawa to get these programs assembled and announced?
Thank you, Chris. The unemployment report today was one of the worst in Alberta's modern history. We all knew that was going to be the case. What disturbs me most is that we're nowhere close to being out of the woods. However, the fact that we will begin the relaunch of our economy by relaxing public health measures next week shows that there is some hope for people to start getting back to work. About 12% of our labor force had been affected by businesses suspended because of public health orders. And gradually more and more of those folks will be able to get back to work. But as you know, we're dealing with a double whammy in Alberta's economy, because layered on top of the coronavirus recession is the lowest oil prices in history. And most projections are that we'll be living in a very low price environment for our largest resource for upwards of 18 months. So while the rest of the world may experience a strong V-shaped recovery with significant growth in the latter half of this year, we'll have some of that, but we will not regain all of the lost ground as long as energy prices remain in the basement. That is why our government has acted with unprecedented ambition, committing already some $15 billion to provide financial support to families, job creators, liquidity measures, deferrals, and we will be taking other action. At the same time, we've been coping with multiple emergencies, including the one we're talking about here today, the once-in-a-100-year ice jams in the north. So we are going deep into the province's balance sheet to support people. We are bringing together an ambitious economic recovery package. This Monday, we had a day-long retreat with our Economic Recovery Council. Our focus won't just be responding to the immediate crisis, but the broader and deeper rebuild of Alberta's economy, its diversification. And on this, let me say, I was on the phone with the president of the National Bank recently, the Montreal-based bank, who said to me, Premier, it doesn't matter how tough things get in terms of this crisis or energy prices, the most important asset that Alberta has is its entrepreneurial culture, which is unlike anywhere else in Canada, unlike anywhere else in the world. And that's what gives me the confidence that we will get through this. In terms of, I understand the Prime Minister announced at least a one-month extension to the wage subsidy. I appreciate that. we had strongly recommended the wage subsidy model to maintain a connection between workers and their employers. We were concerned that if instead all of those folks were laid off, instead of being kept on the books of employers, that it would make the relaunch, the restart, slower and more challenging. So by maintaining that connection, I think that's a solid way to help to get to a faster reopening of the economy. But I will express disappointment in the slowness of the federal government to respond to the most heavily hit sectors of the Canadian economy, which, as you've identified, are the oil and gas sector, tourism, and airlines. We're now 2 months into this thing, where a month ago, the federal finance minister said that the Government of Canada was hours or days away from the announcement of a major package to help ensure a future for Canada's largest industry, our oil and gas sector. But we're a month further, and we still have seen no progress. I want to thank, once again, however, the federal government for the $1.7 billion investment in accelerated well reclamation that's already getting people back to work here in Alberta, as well as the credit backstop being delivered by the Business Development Bank and Export Development Canada, which we think for a maximum of $100 million loans, focused on the mid and junior size oil and gas companies, which we think may have an actual value of several $billion in credit terms. But ultimately, we cannot take a risk on the future of the largest subsector of the Canadian economy, oil and gas, which is responsible for 500,000 Canadian jobs, directly and indirectly, $370 billion of revenues over the past couple of decades to government, our largest export industry. We cannot risk losing that. And nor do I want to risk a scenario where we end up seeing foreign actors, perhaps some of whom created the price crisis in oil, picking up the crown jewels of Canada's natural resources for pennies on the dollar. We cannot let that happen. So that is why I reiterate our call for urgent federal action. We continue to be told that the Government of Canada is working on this package, and it needs to be done not just for oil and gas in terms of extraordinary liquidity measures, credit backstop, but also, as you say, for the tourism operators who are completely shut down, and the aviation sector that is hemorrhaging money, the airlines. I have been in constant contact with the CEO of WestJet. Just earlier today was communicating with the CEO of Air Canada. We cannot function a modern economy without our airlines. And I want to repeat a special point about WestJet, a great Alberta-based company that employs thousands of people in this province, a great example of Alberta enterprise, and these companies and their workers are also in desperate need of support to get through this critical time.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Kenney Trenton with Kicks FM. Go ahead, Kenney.
Thank you very much for taking my call. The question I actually have is for MLA Dan Williams. Sir, we've heard the announcement today about $147 million coming up for victims of northern flooding. Number one, have you heard anything about the full damage assessment in Fort Vermilion? And number two, is there any estimate on how much of that, if any, could be available to residents of the area?
Sure. I might let Minister Madu speak to some of the estimates of damages, as his department's been working at length with the POC to see exactly what has happened. My understanding is there's approximately 122 different buildings, public and private, that have been flooded, affected in some way, whether it be overland or back up through sewers. This announcement today is about making sure that those residents, not that we act as an insurance in replace of that, but we make sure that they have what they need to keep going forward. Many of these residents, as the Premier noted, have been through fires very recently. The flooding, what came to a point in 2018 where it was close to breaking over again. These guys, they just want to get to work, they want to get back there, and that's why we're making this investment, to make sure that Albertans in the north can continue to work in the land, access to those resources that is really the heart of the Alberta and Canadian economy.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
And thank you, Kenney, for that question. and just to confirm, we've heard from local leaders, especially the Reeve of Mackenzie County, that they are looking at damage costs in the neighborhood of about $45 million. But I just need to be clear that we are still at the assessment stage, and although these are preliminary numbers, we do expect that number to change. Thank you.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Vincent McDermott with Fort McMurray today. Go ahead, Vince.
No.
Hi, this is a question for the Premier. Premier, Alberta will soon be fighting wildfires and likely evacuations and property destruction from those fires. So for those upcoming disasters, how fiscally prepared is the province for the eventual recovery situation? And how concerned are you that evacuations or recovery work could also create a situation where the COVID virus could thrive just as the number of new cases started dropping across the province?
We had some audio challenges there, so I didn't. Could you repeat the second part of the question? Didn't quite hear it.
Yeah, sure. How concerned are you that evacuations or recovery work could also create a situation where COVID could thrive just as the number of new cases started dropping?
Okay. So on the first question, I can say we are well advanced in planning for wildfire season. We know it's coming, and we already have several active wildfires, primarily in the north. Some of those are, frankly, localized fires left over from the big Chuck Egg fire, where it was burning basically peat below the snow level, and that's not new. That's a very typical thing where a big fire will persist all the way through the winter, and so Alberta Wildfire Service is already containing those fires. Alberta Wildfire has also surged its hiring to its highest level ever. They're in the process of training, I believe it's a couple of hundred new additional wildfire fighters, in part because we cannot count on supplementary firefighters joining us from other provinces or regions, like last year Australia, for example, because of the travel restrictions. So we've got to build up our own Alberta domestic wildfire service to extraordinary levels, just because we can't call on other places for surge capacity. And so we're making the money available for the expanded wildfire service. I believe Minister Dreeshen, who's responsible for Minister Forests, he gave an update on these issues on our preparedness for wildfire season a couple of weeks ago, and we can get you the transcript on that. And is Shane Schreiber here? He might be able to. Do you have anything else to add on preparedness for wildfire season? Come on in, Shane. I'll put you on the spot.
No, Premier, you've covered it really well. And then there was the other part of the question was around evacuations. So we are prepared for evacuations. We've seen a new protocol used in the evacuations up north, where instead of using communal lodging, we put people into individual lodging, usually commercial lodging like hotels or work camps. Before they go into those hotels, they are essentially checked to make sure that they're at least symptom-free from COVID. And then Alberta Health Services has got an exceptional capacity to test rapidly and contact trace if we do have an outbreak in one of the evacuation areas, and so we would rapidly deploy that to make sure that the outbreak didn't spread any further. So I think we've had to learn very quickly how to deal with evacuations under a COVID environment. We've already had to test it and use it for real up in Wood Buffalo and Mackenzie County, and so I think we'll be fairly well prepared to deal with evacuations from any wildfires or any additional floods.
I'll just add one. I just wanted to add one more point, which is we are especially concerned about wildfires this year, precisely because if they negatively affect air quality across the province, that would put at higher risk people with respiratory diseases during the COVID pandemic. We know that people with pre-existing respiratory conditions are at a higher risk level to this particular novel coronavirus, and so weakening their respiratory condition through smoke inhalation would obviously be a real problem. And that's one of the reasons we've already brought in, much earlier than we normally would have, a fire ban in many parts of the province. And we know some people got upset about that, but we just ask them, this is a unique year, and if a sacrifice means you're not going to set a campfire in your backyard or when you go out camping in a provincial park for the time being, I think that's a price worth paying for the health of your fellow Albertans.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Emma Graney with the Globe and Mail. Go ahead, Emma.
Yeah, g'day. This question is for the Premier. Thanks for taking my question. I know that you spoke a little bit about this yesterday, but I want to ask you more about the Curl Lake outbreak. It's been linked to 20 cases outside Alberta, including a remote northern Saskatchewan Dene village. So was enough done? And what do you say to the thousands of energy workers who are currently concerned for their safety, who are either in camps or they're working in upgraders? And I guess how do you reassure them that they're not going to be getting sick here?
Thank you, Emma. First of all, I would say that I'm pleased that the number of infections associated with the Curl camp have largely stabilized. So we haven't seen the kind of exponential growth as in worse outbreaks. So that is in part because of early intervention by both Imperial Oil and Alberta Health Services. Yesterday I spoke at length to the president of Imperial Oil Canada, and he wanted to commend AHS for their rapid deployment of staff and PPE, as well as rapid testing response of everybody who was at the camp. In terms of spread outside the province, that is a concern. I've spoken to both Premiers Moe of Saskatchewan and Horgan of British Columbia, because I believe, I don't know have the exact number, but certainly a certain number of workers typically at the Curl camp are residents of those two provinces. So we have ensured that AHS has shared the names and contact information of Curl Lake workers who are normally resident in those and other provinces, so that their public health people can do the proper tracing and tracking. This was the potential of outbreaks in northern work camps was a concern for us from the very beginning, Emma, and that is why we actioned a critical infrastructure essential worker program as part of our broader COVID response. And through that, we've invited companies to give us a list of their core essential workers to operate critical infrastructure, including in situ plants, oil sands camps, so that we can ensure faster access to testing, rapid, kind of concierge service at AHS, so they get rapid responses to any technical questions, support in terms of self-isolation and quarantine, and other public health supports. So we've set up a special unit working with the Emergency Management Agency at the Provincial Operations Centre to provide a package of supports to northern work camps, and for example, to power plants, water sanitation facilities, and other elements of critical infrastructure across Alberta. I know that the AHS is constantly learning from lessons as we go through the pandemic about how we could respond even more quickly and to hopefully prevent any future outbreaks in camps like that.
Okay, we have time for two more. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Janet French with CBC Edmonton. Go ahead, Janet.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. I actually had a question about labor. I was curious about the Prime Minister's announcement. Sorry, this is for the Premier. I guess I should specify. The unions have been asking for a really transparent process about how you're going to divvy out these wage top-ups to different workers. I wanted to know which workers are priorities for your government for these additional payments during the pandemic, and how will you decide how to allot Alberta's share?
Thank you, Janice. So we actually discussed exactly that issue a couple of hours ago at the Emergency Management Cabinet Committee, and a little bit more work needs to be done before we can make an announcement because the parameters of the federal program are still need greater clarity, so we want to ensure that we comply. But our goal is to focus the wage top-up for emergency for a low-income emergency, let me rephrase that. The wage top-up for low-income essential workers, we're going to focus that on long-term care facilities and other congregate residences for seniors who are, of course, most vulnerable to the pandemic. And that will include, for example, healthcare aides at long-term care facilities and associated facilities. So we're looking at how, whether there are other categories of workers that can or should be included. It's important to underscore that this is a discrete and time-limited program, and it's not a permanent wage increase, and it can't be for everybody. There's just the federal the allotment for Alberta is $46 million is the full federal piece before we go into the cost sharing side of it, and it's for a limited period of time. I think it's for 3 months. Speaking from memory here, and so we want to focus it where it is most needed. And I think we've all recognized that the greatest risk is in and around nursing homes, long-term care, seniors' residences. So that's our primary focus. We've also been talking to community and social services about workers in community homes with people with intellectual disabilities, for example. There are some, really where we're focused on is where there are retention challenges, where you have people making very low wages, whose work is essential to provide care to the vulnerable, where there are retention challenges on the part of the employers. And those are the main criteria that are informing our decisions in this respect.
Okay, we have time for one more. Operator, can you please put through the last caller?
Last question is Mirna Jucic with Radio Canada. Go ahead, Mirna.
Thank you for taking my question. Ma question est pour le Premier ministre, M. Kenney. J'aimerais, si vous pouvez être un peu plus précis sur comment le 147 millions va être utilisé pour aider les sinistrés. Et puis, étant donné la situation avec la pandémie, comment ça va compliquer la construction?
Merci. Et heureusement, j'ai 2 députés du gouvernement ici qui parlent français. Alors, aujourd'hui, nous annonçons 147 millions de dollars pour aide d'urgence pour les Albertans au nord qui ont souffert à cause des inondations dernièrement. C'est basé sur une estimate de dommages qui a été causé par les inondations à Fort McMurray et dans Mackenzie County. Alors, le maire de la municipalité de Wood Buffalo a estimé que le dommage est d'environ 100 millions de dollars pour la région-là, et le rive du Mackenzie County, M. Kennelson a estimé, je crois, 40 millions, un peu plus près 40 millions de dollars de dommages dans son comté. Alors, c'est un investissement dans le cadre du programme de réponse au désastre. En bout de ligne, on va aller au gouvernement fédéral pour nous aider parce qu'il y a un programme où ils aident avec les événements comme ça. C'est pour les événements qui sont vraiment extraordinaires, les événements qui passent peut-être une fois par un siècle. Alors, c'est une épreuve de magnitude de ces inondations au nord. Est-ce que vous allez ajouter quelque chose, madame?
Oui, merci, c'est Leila Goodridge. Alors, c'est pour avoir le rétablissement des citoyens, des entreprises ainsi que la communauté en général. Alors, il y a des spécifiques qui vont être annoncés au fur et à mesure, mais c'est à propos de ça. Merci.
Et je dois ajouter qu'on a déjà donné 8 millions de dollars des paiements d'urgence pour aider les évacués de ces inondations. On a fait les paiements pour 7 400 évacués du nord. Ça comprend évidemment les gens de Fort McMurray et de Fort Vermilion.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you.